Is there a way to apologize without compromising one's belief if there's a disagreement?
If there's a genuine disagreement there, then you might actually be more in the realm of disagreement than in the realm of apology. It depends on whether you truly do believe that you have done something wrong. I don't think you can give an authentic apology unless you genuinely have reflected on the issue and you accept that, yes, what I said, what I did was wrong. I shouldn't have done it. It caused harm to that other person.
Thank you for coming on to the podcast with Josh and I today. We're really, really excited. And I've been really looking forward to talking with you ever since reading your book. Fascinating. And I have different questions than Josh because as I'm an executive coach, whereas he's a consultant. So we come in from two completely different angles.
Sounds great.
Okay, good. Do you want to start us off? We might have David talk about himself a little bit.
Well, yeah,
absolutely.
Tell us a little bit about yourself, David.
Sure. So as you could probably tell by my accent, I'm originally from Australia, moved to the US about a decade ago. I have two kids, two boys, age 5 and 3. My professional training is as a lawyer originally, worked in employment and anti-discrimination law. And then I moved over into this field of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and have been working at a research center at NYU School of Law called the Meltzer Center for Diversity and Inclusion and Belonging, where I work very closely with my co-author, Kenji Yoshino, and he and I just wrote this new book, Say the Right Thing.
Congratulations. So first book, it's coming out, February 7th, is that right?
February 7th, correct.
Yeah, I think we're hoping this interview will come out about a week before, so that's what we're shooting for. So
okay, yeah, sounds good.
Yeah, and of course, since we just have you, I won't try to tell a joke about attorneys because I was sort of thinking if we had two attorneys, that might be a little scary to talk to for some people. But you probably tried so many of those jokes. We are wondering though, just if you could tell us a little bit more. I'd love to hear. When we read the book, I think we saw lots of connections to other books. Some you referenced, like Difficult Conversations. Could you talk about, in terms of communication, change management, some of the stuff we dabble in? What were some of the kind of main influencers, you would say, researchers, thinkers, mentors, writers that sort of, there was a long list, obviously, of the references in the back, but if you could pick like the 3 most influential folks, topics, whatnot in the work, we'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, so definitely the book Difficult Conversations for sure was a huge influence on us. That was actually, we taught that book in a course at NYU Law where we taught a course called Leadership, Diversity, and Inclusion. And that was one of the texts that we assigned because we wanted to give students skills on how to navigate difficult conversations. But what we kind of found with that book was, as you know, it gives really kind of broadly applicable advice around how to navigate conversations really on any topic in the workplace or with neighbors or whoever. And we felt like these conversations in particular created some of their own unique challenges for people that book didn't really delve into, not because it's a flaw with the book, it's just not what they were setting out to do. And so but the basic structure of that book, the fact that it's practical, applicable, skills based, we wanted our book to be similar in that way. Another huge influence on us was the social psychologist Dolly Chugh. She's written a book called The Person You Mean to Be, which is about similar issues of bias and inclusion. The difference with her book is that it's more of an overall guide for people on how to be more inclusive in their life, right? As opposed to a laser focus on the topic of conversations. And we wanted to, again, really narrowly focus on that. So I would say our book is kind of like if Dolly Chugh's book and Difficult Conversations had a baby, is kind of how I would think about it and what we were trying to achieve here.
Okay, great. You want to go next? Want me to go next?
Yeah, you go.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think one of the ways I would love to start, is sort of in the middle of the book, actually, around areas of disagreement. And while the goal for today is not to get into a debate or to change anyone's mind, we really want to
Mm-hmm.
Cultivate curiosity, right? It's our goal. And
Chapter 3.
Chapter
I
3,
like that.
really like that.
Cultivate curiosity.
And I think one of the areas we were thinking about was, on the one of the, kind of the current tenor of the nation's dialogue, which is why I thought the topic was so timely, right? Is we have such challenge around having good dialogue, even when we have significant disagreements, of which even the three of us probably have significant disagreements on issues. Understanding that, I would love to sort of start with that idea of uncommon commonalities. Can you talk a little bit more about, and I think the goal would be to like find that early on in the conversation, right? Can you talk more about just what those are? I mean, we read about it, but folks listening may not have. What those are, and then maybe if there's suggesting ways when you go through a conversation, how do you get to those areas? Like, how do you get to those, like out loud, so you sort of agree with the other person you might be disagreeing with on commonalities?
Yeah, so it's a great question. We also think this is a particularly challenging area in the book and in these conversations more generally, because it's about conversations about identity and diversity issues, and you only need to look at the news headlines to realize people are kind of screaming at each other about these topics a lot. So one of the tips we have in that chapter is to find uncommon commonalities, as you said, and the thought behind that is, oftentimes in these conversations, we fixate on the areas where we disagree with each other, but it can actually help to have a more respectful disagreement if you realize that there are lots of areas of overlap. And quite often people discover those areas of overlap without expecting that they're going to, because we tend to assume on these topics, right? If let's say someone's more socially conservative about a particular issue and someone's more liberal on an issue, I think a lot of the time, both parties are going to assume going into that conversation that they're kind of radical opposites of each other, when in fact there might be areas that they agree on. And so a good example of this would be, Kenji and I are both gay, and we both have, been advocates for same-sex marriage. But, one of the things that we had in common with people who perhaps have more conservative views on that topic is that we have a reverence for the institution of marriage, right? There are some people within the LGBTQ community, especially historically, who have had a total disdain for the entire institution of marriage and have seen it as an inherently oppressive, patriarchal construct, et cetera, et cetera. And so that would be an example of kind of an area where if someone were to have a conversation on that topic, you might be able to find some common ground just about a respect for the institution that people share. But a lot of the commonalities are going to come out through things that aren't really about talking about the topic itself. You just find it through talking with the other person. So an example that we use in the book is a conversation between a professor of African American studies, Carol Anderson, and these two parents in Georgia who are conservative and were opposing the hiring of a diversity, equity, and inclusion administrator in their local school district. And they were very much in this mode of, opposing critical race theory, etc. And they're speaking with Carol Anderson, who's a well-known progressive race scholar, right? But in their conversation, and it's available online for anyone who wants to watch it, it goes for about an hour. But what I found fascinating about that conversation was they spend a lot of time just talking, just getting to know each other, right? What was your family background? Where did you grow up? And what they found through that experience was that they had a lot of shared identities in terms of the kind of family that they grew up in, the sort of values that they were raised. And I think that really set the scene to ensure that when they did get to the disagreements, they were able to do it in a more respectful way because they felt more of that affinity with each other. It's sort of like, okay, I'm no longer seeing you as an enemy now in this conversation. I'm seeing you as someone that I can relate to in certain ways, which then makes it easier for us when we get to the points of disagreement to be able to have that in a more respectful manner, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I think one of the things I was hoping for your permission to try out was even attempting to find a few of those between us. We had the privilege, of course, of reading a lot about you in the book. You don't know much about us.
Yeah.
We, as you're not surprised to see, we're both white, middle-aged men using some of those characteristics, tend to be conservative-leaning Christians. So there may be significant areas of disagreement, but, a couple of things I noted in the book, attempting to build these uncommon commonalities, I noted was I think we all agree that there's significant room for improvement, right, around dialogue, right, and these very sensitive issues. I think, one of the things I really liked about the book that a lot of business leaders I work with don't like is this idea that everyone has bias, but actually that's not too far from the Christian view around sin, right? And the fact that we all have this continual struggle against something in ourselves that forces us away from the things we want to do or hold truths, that there's actually a lot of commonality there. The Bible also is heavily, filled with this call to justice for the widow and the orphan, the outcast, the poor, the oppressed. I mean, you can't get away from that, right? And so I think a lot of overlap, even if there are areas of disagreement. And I will say, on a personal note, I noted you mentioned in your about you preferring to avoid conflict and disagreement. That resonated with me. I'm the same way. Watch out for Erik. He's not that way, but but for me. So anyhow, I don't know if that's that's a good. Tell me if I did okay there. You can coach me a little bit, but that was an attempt to kind of come to the conversation and go, okay, well, there's a lot of commonalities here, even if we have disagreement in other areas.
No, I love that. And I mean, I would sort of add to that as well, which might not have been apparent from the book, that, I grew up in an evangelical Christian household and still continue. I don't sort of identify myself as a Christian these days, but I still very much respect, Christian worldview and thinking, and have been immersed in that in my family and friendship networks and so on. And I think a lot of my thinking on these issues has been influenced by my Christian upbringing in that way. So, for example, you mentioned the connection between everyone having bias and everyone being a sinner, which I love, and I hadn't made that connection in my head before. But I think there's also, we write in the book about apologies, and I think the idea of repentance in Christianity, I think, I think also we write a whole chapter about the importance of being generous toward people who make mistakes in these conversations, generous toward sources of non-inclusive behavior. At least for me, part of the discomfort that I feel with a lot of the sort of cancel culture type approaches to these conversations is that I very much believe in extending grace to people and, forgiving them for missteps. And I think part of the reason why I am drawn to that kind of approach is because of the influence that Christianity has had on my own thinking, to care about, to really believe that every human being is capable of redemption and growth in this area, right? And I feel like sometimes in these conversations, people don't extend that grace to each other.
Right.
David, I loved what you had to say about apologizing and grace, and jumping down to one of the questions that I had later in the podcast, but I'm going to pull back up. The way I coach, the base of my coaching, the foundation, I use the format of grace, truth, and time. And I loved how you brought up grace, because if you coach someone, no one's perfect at all. So my question is there a way to apologize without compromising one's belief if there's a disagreement? So take two sides, and no one's typically perfect. So let's say both sides have a fault somewhere, but how do you apologize without compromising? Because I think a lot of times people think if I apologize, I've completely given up, everything. Do you see where I'm saying?
Yeah.
Figure that out.
Yeah, I mean, the way I would think about this is really, if there's a genuine disagreement there, then you might actually be more in the realm of disagreement than in the realm of apology. So there actually might be, it depends on whether you truly do believe that you have done something wrong. I don't think you can give an authentic apology unless you genuinely have reflected on the issue and you accept that, yes, what I said, what I did was wrong. I shouldn't have done it. It caused harm to that other person. If you reflect on it and you think, for example, let's take the example I gave earlier about same-sex marriage, for instance, right? If someone has a belief based on their religious values that's in opposition to that, and let's say they voice that opinion, and then someone in my position says, well, that really upset me that you expressed that point of view and I want an apology from you. I think in that instance, if you felt like you expressed your viewpoint respectfully and you were just, sharing from the heart what you think, and you didn't say anything horribly offensive to me, then I think that's where you're really in the realm of disagreement at that point, rather than in the realm of apology. And I worry that if you tried to offer a sort of half apology there, that it would come across as insincere, and it wouldn't land in the way that you would want it to anyway. So I think with an apology, I guess the only area where I feel like maybe you could do it, sort of, would be if you just said to the other person that, you're very sorry for hurting them, right? It hurts you to see them in pain, right? From hurting them. And yet also explain the sort of basis for your perspective. That means that you're honoring your values and the disagreement that you're having, rather than trying to tick off all of the elements of an apology that we talk about in the book.
Sure. No, thank you. Switching gears a little bit, just because we have to go so fast. By the way, I cut out so much from this script trying to get it down to 45. I had like 2-3 hours we could probably spend with you. So, this might feel fast. I apologize.
No worries.
For sure, because we're not trying to rush through this, because there's a lot of great content. One of the questions I have, a little context, is I have one of my 3 kids is Haitian born, so he's adopted. He's obviously Black. We face bias at times. That's not the nature of my question. One of the things I am challenged with, I've struggled with for years, I want to pose to you, is personally wrestled with how to navigate, when cultivating curiosity, how to navigate the difference between, and pick any, I would say any sort of characteristic group maybe you don't know a lot about, right? So not specifically race, but how do you navigate the difference between cliche and stereotypes and a true understanding of the culture, right, of a group of people associated with that characteristic, if that makes sense? Because, like, for example, one of the things I try to do with my son is I seems, the research I've done, and again, I don't know how perfect it is, barbershop culture is important to the African-American community. So I make a point of finding a barber who knows how to cut my son's hair, who most times is either African-American or biracial, and make an experience out of going to a barbershop, even if it's not where I live in a rural area, not entirely Black barbershop. But I've done that, and I've been the only white guy in the room, and it's interesting experience. How would you sort of help someone navigate the difference between not just extending the stereotypes of a characteristic group, but also trying to understand the culture? Because I think it's really, I struggle to sort of pull the two apart.
Yeah, that's a great question. I haven't been asked that before. I mean, what comes to mind for me with that is learning about any of these issues, right? Any kind of identity group that you think about. You could spend your entire life reading books, reading articles, talking to people from that group, listening to podcasts, etc., and you still would not learn everything there is to know about a particular culture or their history or their traditions or what have you. So I think what you just described to me is exactly the kind of mindset we're trying to cultivate in the book, which is a curiosity toward learning while also recognizing the danger of stereotyping, recognizing the need to continue learning. I mean, for example, like, let's say you thought you understood something about this culture and you said, oh, I think, people from this culture, this is very important to people from this culture. And then as you start immersing yourself in that, you discover, oh, actually, like, I think this is not correct, or I've been misled here, or I've spoken to other people who tell me that this is not really a thing, or that's something that so again, that's part of curiosity, is you're going to make mistakes, you're going to learn, and then you can recalibrate and you can kind of add to that over time. So I think what I would really say there, it's that constant posture of openness and learning that's really going to serve people well in this domain, because everyone's going to make mistakes. I think a lot of what holds people back is fear, right? I start to learn, I realize I've put my foot in it, and so I'm just going to withdraw altogether and not even try because I failed the first time. And what we want to do is actually, cultivate more of that growth mindset of, I am going to fail, but I fail at everything sometimes. And then I just pick myself back up again and try to learn more. I'm not sure if that fully answers the question you asked, but I hope it kind of indicates where we're headed, which is just recognizing that it's kind of a lifelong process of learning and correcting as you go.
Yeah, no, I think I appreciate you did answer my question. Yeah, I think it's just one of those, keep leaning in. It's not an easy answer, to sort of, you maybe laugh when you said a lifelong challenge, because I'm very much a check the box type of person. And I realized very early on in our journey that there was never a point at which I was going to introduce my son to enough people who look like him and find enough things that were, sort of connected to his culture. There is no end to it.
Right.
Which is both daunting, but then at the same time, you sort of accept it and you lean into it. Right. And I think, I think that makes sense.
One of my favorite parts of your book, David, was you have this really great, on pages 164 and 165, strategies when there are disagreements. And I've always found myself, I don't know what to say. And as I've worked more on coaching others and being coached myself, I love this because you're kind of giving me some weapons to not just say, I just disagree with you or this or that, but strategies such as emphasize the impact on you or model what they could have said. And I've tried some of these, and I was thinking of, I wrote in the side of your book, it's really, I wrote emotional intelligence is kind of, were those strategies kind of built on like a lot of the emotional intelligence work that's coming out? Or how did you get to that? Because I agreed with everything you wrote on these 2 pages. Like, you nailed it. I feel like I can engage in conversations with people with different views by using these strategies. Tell me about that.
Oh, well, thank you. So yeah, these are basically strategies of, if someone says something that you perceive to be, non-inclusive or biased or what have you, and you want to challenge what they've said, but you freeze up and don't know what to say, it's a kind of a menu for people to choose from of different options of what might make sense for them to say. And we came up with that because we wanted to think of responses that would help the other person hear a different point of view or a different perspective, or learn from, perhaps the mistake that they had made, without completely shutting down the conversation, right? I think this gets a little bit back to the cancel culture stuff I was mentioning earlier of, it can be tempting when you hear someone do something that you consider to be offensive or harmful in some way to immediately jump to, well, I should, shout them down or condemn them for what they've said, or alternatively to just run away and think, well, I'm too scared to say anything, so I'm just going to say nothing. And we wanted to offer people tools that would really invite learning. So, another example that we have there is to say, one of the things that I would say is, when you said X, I felt Y. So the focus is on me. The focus is on my interpretation of what they said, rather than immediately jumping to accusing them of something. And we built it. Some of the examples in that table are just lines that we came up with entirely on our own. And then others come from different sources, including the Dolly Chook book that I mentioned earlier, including work by Diane Goodman, who's a diversity consultant, a couple of other books that are in the citations with that table. But we just packaged it together from a whole bunch that we'd found out there.
Great.
Yeah, I like that.
Kind of switching to another topic. This is kind of early in the book, but I wanted to ask a little bit about it, just to understand a difference I was struggling to pull apart. You mentioned the 4 conversational traps. You tell an interesting story about Nancy, I think, in the online forum, kind of in the fall, and the sort of the difference.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was following a shooting spree, and I think there was. I'm summarizing both. We haven't seen it, but I think keep me honest. I think if I understood it right, that the coverage was really about the race element. I think she brought the fact that she thought it was a gender element. And while I don't necessarily, I wouldn't engage in online forums, and there's a lot of problems in that whole scenario, which you outlined. I guess the question I was left with was, could you help me understand the difference between channel switching, which I think is what you called it, versus just having a difference of opinion? Because on the other hand, you could just say, well, Nancy just saw a different correlation of the data points, right? So what's the difference between that channel switching, which I think you said is something to try to avoid, versus just having a difference of opinion?
It's a great question. So this is about a story relating to, I believe it was the Atlanta spa shooting, where it was in particular, Asian women seemed to be the primary target of the shooter. And a lot of the media coverage really focused on the Asian element of it, and we're attributing the shooter's motives to race, like a racial animus. And so Nancy's point in this forum was to say that she thought it was actually a gender issue, And initially, the people that she was speaking to said, "Oh, great point, Nancy. Like the media's ignored a lot of the gender angle. Like, thank you for raising issues of intersectionality, meaning the intersection of race and gender at the same time."
Right.
And Nancy responded, "Oh, no. I'm not talking about the intersection. This is just about gender. This is not about race. Stop talking about race." And of course, that made a lot of people upset to say, well, why you've just said that we're ignoring gender, and now why are you ignoring race? And it led to a big blow up, and the conversation was kind of a disaster. And so the point we make is it's not helpful to sort of reflexively switch channels. So oftentimes when people switch channels, it's because they feel uncomfortable talking about a topic that's been raised by someone else, and they want their topic to have prime of place in the conversation. And so sometimes it's kind of, well, I'm just going to like pull the conversation over to my preferred topic, and that's not really a great strategy. But, one of the if you genuinely think, right, like let's say another example that we use is when someone was talking about systemic racism, and the person in the conversation actually thought, you know what, I don't think this is a race issue. I think this is a socioeconomic status issue. I think this is an issue of poverty. So I think we should be talking about this. Now, if you genuinely believe that, and that's your considered view, I actually think it's perfectly fine under the principles we have in the disagreement chapter to then have that conversation as a respectful disagreement, where you say, I hear you on the race issue. Here's why, my considered view is that I think it's, more of a gender issue or more of a socioeconomic status issue. I think the main tip I would give to people in doing that is it might be helpful to have the conversation about whatever issue the other person has raised with you, and then raise your own issue as a separate topic to add into the conversation, rather than doing it as a channel switching thing. So I think if Nancy had acknowledged the concerns that people have about race and sort of allowed them to talk about race as an issue, and then also kind of raise separately, hey everyone, I'm concerned about the omission of gender in this conversation, I think that would have gone down better for her than by insisting that actually you need to stop talking about your topic. We're actually only going to talk about my topic.
Right. Okay. So I think what I'm inferring there is just a general posture of humility, I think is probably a good element to include, right? And when we're trying to explain our views around topics we know are probably going to be met with some disagreement. Is that a fair summary?
Totally. And also the difference between reflexive and reflective. So we make that distinction a few times in the book, where oftentimes with the negative behavior that we're talking about is more of a reflexive knee-jerk reaction that people might have, as opposed to taking a beat to really think about it and then offer a considered viewpoint. I think there's a huge difference between I'm so uncomfortable with this that I'm just going to fling back a different topic in your face, as opposed to, yeah, I hear you I've heard you with curiosity. I've thought about your viewpoint. I respect where you're coming from. And yet here is how I continue to see the issue differently.
Right. Okay.
So I'm not only am I a coach, David, I run a home health care company, and we're in the state of Washington State, which is one of the more liberal states in the United States. And so we have, I would say, we have about 80 employees here, and they're exactly what you would expect for a very diverse company. I think I have a solution, at least in the private, and I wanted to run this by you. So like anywhere else, just say take 80 random people in a small rural community, and you're going to get everything from far right to far left to you name it. And the way I've approached leading our company is not to say, okay, we're going to be a conservative company or a liberal company, but I focused on key performance indicators, because I see it as a way of, because I mean, really at the end of the day, how great are we at taking care of our customers, selling wheelchairs, you name it. You come to us not for our politics, you come to us for our care. So my question for you is on more business side things. I'm not talking about, I think a solution is not necessarily what political beliefs someone has or religious, is what are the key benchmarks that determine a good or bad business in an industry. So my business is how great can we take care of customers in home healthcare or in other areas. And I think what we do is we get distracted with these side things where, like, really, if you come to my business, it's not what I believe. You just need a wheelchair for a loved one. Am I pointed in the right direction? And I think we get distracted with the wrong beliefs when it should be quite simple.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, businesses all have a mission, a purpose of what it is that they're working on, right? And if you're not running an ideological business, right, lobbying firm or an activist organization or something, then I think this distinction that you're drawing between the key performance indicators that you want people to achieve and what you're focusing on in the day-to-day work and distinguishing that from political debates, I think is perfectly reasonable and healthy, in fact. I think where it can sometimes get complicated or muddled is, what happens if, let's say, someone in your business says, hey, I am a whatever, insert group here, right? I'm a Black woman, or I am a lesbian or whatever, and I feel excluded in this workplace. Here's something that someone said to me in a meeting last week that made me feel small or made me feel excluded. Then all of a sudden you are forced into that conversation of having to navigate that dynamic of, okay, are we doing enough as a culture to make sure everyone in this space feels that they're included? But I see that as different from the political angle, because I think including people on the basis of their identity characteristics, I think you can distinguish that between having a debate between the far left and the far right. I think that's just about how do we treat people with respect and inclusion in our organization.
And I think just studying like ADA stuff, like I have one of my team leaders, he has a CF and he has a really hard time walking, whereas I've had to be able to say, hey, I need to know, here's your job description and your KPIs. I need to know the extent of your disability. What do I need to accommodate from? So I had to just sit down and say, I need to know, how can I accommodate your disability? Because it's a physical disability. He can only walk so far. And what I was encouraged with is he was really open and honest. Hey, thank you for asking me that question, because he did need to be accommodated for, because he gets tired because of his disability. But I think a lot of people feel so scared to even ask those questions because they can see, how do I accommodate for this? But what he does bring to me, he brings in terms of fitting of wheelchairs, a dynamic that I, as an able-bodied marathon running individual, could never bring, because he lives in a mobility challenged body. So
yeah.
And this is where I'm trying to figure out how to put the KPIs on one side versus perspectives and disabilities on the other side. It's tricky, but I do think it's doable with key performance indicators on most issues.
Yeah, and I think what that example illustrates really well is just the power of actually showing people that you care, right? And that you want to create an environment that meets their needs as a person, and that you acknowledge that that's an issue. I think sometimes, as you said, people are so scared of getting it wrong that they think, well, I'm just not going to bring this up at all. I'm just going to ignore it and hope that it doesn't become an issue. And I think what the problem with that is, from his perspective, he might interpret that not as sort of neutrality. He might interpret that as, this person's not valuing who I am or treating me in the way that I want to be treated in this work environment. And so what you did by actually going to him and having the conversation, I think, was critical. And so often in leadership, I think, just that willingness to make yourself feel a little bit uncomfortable, to get outside your comfort zone and sit down with another person and say, hey, how are you experiencing things here? Is there anything that I can do to support you? Just that step alone, I think, is often met with a lot of generosity back on the other side. And even if you make a mistake, even if you accidentally use the wrong word or what have you, I think just the fact that you've shown that outreach and respect to the other person is usually met with goodwill on the other side, in my experience.
And that actually leads me to a question I wanted to ask about allies. You mentioned allies in the book quite a bit, which I really appreciate. I like that language. there's a fear, I think I feel people I talk to that it didn't seem mentioned. You may have meant it sort of, so I'd love to unpack it a little bit, but I think one of the fears is around when you go to be an ally with someone, there may be a desire to ally with them around a particular area, but we have such an all or nothing culture. A lot of these political agendas, I think even just these DE&I agendas are sort of, you have to believe all of it or none of it. There's no in between. That really creates for me a lot of fear, as we talked earlier, about a person of faith who has very core religious beliefs about what's been taught and the authority in our lives. But there are several things in those, right, that I can agree with and several fundamentally can't. How as an ally can I come to someone and sort of like some of the examples Erik talked about and try to help be an ally in one particular area without feeling like I have to completely affirm every other area or every other characteristic where I might have trouble, right?
Yeah.
There's a desire to be compassionate about, no, you shouldn't be treated, you shouldn't be hated. You shouldn't read hateful comments. You shouldn't hear, those anger directed at you for no reason other than your particular characteristic. Even if it's something I disagree with, I as a human feel the need to you, right? There's several, but then in our culture today, I struggle with how do we do that? So can you tell me more about how to navigate that? Does that make sense, that question? Like that fear?
Yeah, no, it totally makes sense. And, one of the things we talk about in a later chapter in the book because we use the term ally in the book in two ways. So one of it is just a very broad term for anyone who belongs to a sort of more advantaged social group on a particular issue, but who is a person of goodwill, right? Who just wants to treat people with respect. Another form of ally is a more active form of ally, which is someone who goes out into the world and steps into situations to try to intervene when someone is being treated badly on a particular issue. And so we give the example of a waitress at a restaurant who overheard one of the customers yelling racist slurs at another customer, and she jumped into the situation and was like, "Get out of my restaurant," and blah, 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 blah. Like that's a very active form of allyship. And one of the points we make in the book is that it is okay, because we think you're going to disagree sometimes. It is okay to disagree with, the person that you're trying to help or trying to support in some way, but just clarify the limitations of that with the other person. So you can say, I don't really think I'm the best ally for you in this particular situation, right? So if you're trying to support them in some way and they say, well, I think the best way that you can support me is X, Y, and Z, and that you don't agree with that or you don't want to do that, it's perfectly fine to say, look, I really respect you. I support you on, A, B, and C things. Here's why I don't think that I'm the best ally for you in this particular situation. And then you can try to re-engage with them on another issue at a different time. Now, that's probably going to be an uncomfortable conversation for you and the other person. They might feel that you've let them down in some way, but I don't really see any other way around it, because if you go along with it, then you've obviously sacrificed your own authenticity and integrity in just sort of going along with something that is not true to who you are. But I also don't think the solution is just to not even have the conversation with them and just to run away. And, I think a part of the theme I think you're probably getting from the tenor of a lot of the answers that I'm giving is I think there's real value in just having that, honest, open, respectful dialogue with the other person about it. And if you do it in a sensitive and curious way, I think the conversation is going to go much more easily than if you just try to run away from the conversation altogether.
Sure.
Yeah, and I think it was page 53, you talk about the importance of emotions. And I think a lot of reasons why we don't engage is, especially in the United States, I don't think our country's very good at emotions. We do anger really well, we do happy really well, but there's I think of the feelings wheel, there's a lot of different emotions.
Right.
So what do you do? I would say a lot of older people, they're still 5-year-olds in terms of their emotional growth. And I think that's kind of what we're running into is people who haven't learned those emotions. What do you do with that if they're just flat out emotionally immature, even though they might be 45 years old? What do you?
Yeah. So one of the tools we talk about is what we call naming and reframing your emotions. So one of the things that often happens in these conversations is that they trigger intense discomfort, right? You're in the conversation, you're feeling this overwhelming inchoate sense of dread, and I just want to get out of this conversation. What we encourage people to do is pause and ask themselves, well, what specific emotion am I feeling right now? It's not just dread or discomfort. It's probably something more specific. And the four that we identify as the most common are fear, anger, guilt, or hopelessness. And of course, it can be other things as well. But I think pausing, there's, psychological literature to suggest that if you just bring up to the surface and name what emotion you're experiencing, that process alone can reduce some of the harmful effects of that emotion on you, because it doesn't just seem so overwhelming in that moment to actually say, oh, you know what I think I'm feeling right now? I think I'm feeling guilt because I just confused two people of the same ethnicity with each other, and I feel really bad that I did that. And so that's what I'm feeling. And then we encourage you to reframe that emotional experience. So once you've identified that that's the emotion, think about whether there is a more positive spin that you can put on the emotion that's more growth oriented. So the guilty story that you would be telling yourself there would be, I'm a horrible person because I mixed up these two people. Mm-hmm. Well, that's not great. That's not learning and growth oriented. A reframed interpretation would be to say, everyone makes mistakes. I will apologize, learn their names, and try better next time. And, that's not going to, as you say, if you've got the emotional capacity of a toddler, then that's not going to work immediately. It's going to take some practice. It might mean that you actually have to step away from the conversation and pause and reflect on it and talk to some other people in your life about it, and then maybe go back into the conversation later and say, hey, I just want to pick up on what we were talking about the other day when you've had time to process it. But that technique of naming the emotion and then trying to reframe it, we think can be helpful over time.
I think we have time for maybe one more question. I want to jump into sort of a big question. I know there's only a couple minutes left. We wanted to go through a lot of use cases we didn't have time to get into. So I'm going to jump into sort of an intense, gnarly one, at least in my opinion. Maybe it's easy. So I'm hoping you can help me. But I want to talk about an example, not because this particular topic is crucially important, but I think it represents some of the current climate around cancel culture. Black Lives Matter, right? Mm-hmm. And I think one of the things that I personally, in a lot of conversations I had, especially during that time, kind of in 2021, when that was particularly heightened sensitivity, was it seemed to be very easy for many people. So this is going from, it's where I'm trying to take our conversation just kind of directionally, is from the one-to-one conversation, which I think we talked a lot about, is to now how do I ally or think about my support for these broader topics. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's pretty easy for most people I talk to about this myself. Like I talked about my son, racism in this country is a problem. But I think, I think the many people I spoke to around specifically the Black Lives Matter movement was the struggle was not with saying at a fundamental level, Black Lives Matter, but it seemed as if the broader movement had sort of aligned itself. Sort of the implication was by saying Black Lives Matter, you're also sort of affirming the much broader agenda around several topics, in particular the LGBTQIA, things. And so there was struggle with, well, how do I say, and then we're being told who didn't, put out there our, color our LinkedIn pages with a black flag or whatever, right? Was, oh, then you don't support anything, you're racist. So how do you pull apart these topics where it seems, again, in culture, agreeing to a particular thing actually means you're trying to affirm a broader agenda, and I may have problems with the broader agenda. That's, comment on that, help me understand that, because I struggle with that personally, and I think that's one of many places I try to figure out,
So first of all, thank you for asking these incredible questions. It's clear you've read the book in a lot of detail, and so I really appreciate these thoughtful and difficult questions, I will say. So thank you.
Only 45 minutes.
No, this is great. So I think I want to tease out a couple of things of what you just said there. So one is, I think part of the problem is this pressure that you may be feeling to publicly align yourself with a particular cause in a way that's quite visible. So you mentioned a profile photo or maybe like a Facebook post or a LinkedIn or what have you. And I personally think that social media is the worst place to have these conversations. We actually at some point considered writing a chapter in the book about having these conversations on social media, and we ultimately abandoned it because we felt like, well, it's just a mess. I think if you want to have productive conversations on these topics, maybe log off and talk to people face to face. So I think the challenge that I would give back to anyone saying, oh, well, why don't you have, this flag or this slogan or this whatever on your social media profile would be, I personally would say, well, I just don't like having these conversations on social media. It's not that I don't agree or support a lot of, issues. It's just that I find that social media flattens and oversimplifies issues that are really quite complex, and I prefer to express my support in other ways. And so I think when you are actually talking with people or having more nuanced conversations, I think is where you can tease out those differences that you're describing, right? Because you might be able to say, here are the ways that I do support the Black community. Here are sort of the things that organizations that I donate to or things that I'm involved in my community, without having to signify in some, visible way that you are a member of a particular movement broadly defined. I don't know if that makes sense, but I kind of feel like, logging off and having these nuanced conversations is a better way to approach it.
No, I really appreciate that. I think what, again, aligning with the book, what you said, which was it invites the more nuanced conversations, because so many times these, media driven kind of frenzies on any part of the political spectrum, by the way, they're everywhere, everywhere, right? That's not, they're so, whatever the opposite of nuance is, right? It becomes very difficult to have a good conversation unless it's actually a real conversation. So really appreciate all the coaching on dialogue, and I know I've learned a lot. So really thank you for the time.
So, and David, I love long form podcasts. I just absolutely love it because there's a give and take. And I even just love seeing your face as you answer the questions, because it's not just, you're a real person, just like I'm a real person. Granted, we're across the country. I absolutely love long form podcasts. So anyway, that's also kind of why we podcast. But is there any question we haven't asked you? I really wish Josh and Erik would have asked you this question. Anything that we haven't asked you about the book, or that just kind of like, hey, I want to share this?
I don't think so, because as I said, I really genuinely think that these questions have been really excellent. I will say sometimes, when I'm asked about it, it's very, very broad, right? Tell me about the book. You've delved into things at a level that I find very impressive. And I think we've kind of covered essentially all the chapters of the book in the questions that you've asked. So no, I don't think I have anything else.
Okay.
Well, super. Well, thank you for taking time
thanks
out
for your
of your
time.
busy
You're busy.
schedule.
Thank you.
And so the book comes out February 7th. Where can people get it?
Anywhere that they would usually buy books. Barnes & Noble, Amazon, their local independent bookstore in their community should have it. So yeah.
Super. We'll also put the link at the bottom of our podcast. I do want to just thank you so much for just talking with us. And before the podcast, Josh and I, when we read books, we argue back and forth over the phone. So it's been fun our questions came out of lots of discussions. We read the book and we kind of feel like college students, and okay, let's go ask the prof now what he meant by a lot of things. So thank you so much for taking.
Oh, good. Well, I love hearing that. Like, if this book stimulates a lot of arguments like that, that's music to my ears, because that's great. We want people to engage with it, disagree with it, debate it, and so that's great.
Excellent. All right, thanks, David. We appreciate your time. And
all right.
Thank Kenji for us as well. I know he couldn't join us, but really appreciate both of you. Thank you.
Of course. No, thank you both.